So I came across a quote not too long ago that I thought was fascinating, and I can't go into all the depths of it. It is a fascinating quote, and it bothered me, and it bothered me in all the best ways. And it's from a New York Times columnist. We'll show you this. His name is Ross, and what Ross did, which I thought was so fascinating, the article is called "In Search of Non-Toxic Manhood." Now, over the last probably like 5 to 7 years, most of us have heard of like toxic masculinity. We've heard variations of this phrase, all these sorts of things. and I've been looking for like a great sort of summary of how I felt about it or what sort of feels nuanced. Now, he's going to reference some characters from fiction that I think are fascinating. If you know their story, it makes more sense. If not, I'll sort of guide us through it. And it's a fairly long quote, so I'm going to try to read it, but I'd love for you to read along on the screen. But when it comes to masculinity, when it comes to the view and the swings of toxic masculinity, what often happens, and you know this, is culturally we go in like big sort of massive swings one way or the other, and however you look at one way or the other gets really interesting about how we talk about it. And his quote around this is so interesting to me because he sort of knocks both sides and I think brings some clarity to it. But here's what he said. He said, contemporary progressivism is constantly inclined to blame any and all models of masculinity for all of the pathologies, I love this, that they aspire to tame. Now, let me just stop right there, which I think is so interesting. Aspiring to tame is one of the most interesting sort of frameworks of this because I think it's fairly true. And what's true about it is this. There's something about a lot of, not all, young boys that have something in them that makes us feel like they need to be a little bit tamed, right? Like my son was hanging with somebody who was watching him the other day, and they went on like a hike, and here's what he did. I love this. Without any prompting, without anything else, he comes back with a stick because yes. You know what I'm saying? He comes back with a stick. And the stick was so precious, like he comes holding it and he makes everything out of the stick. A sword, he's fighting other trees, which I'm like, that's gonna end bad. All these sorts of things. And here's what's interesting about it. My immediate response is, you gotta get rid of the stick because you're gonna hit your younger brother. Now, if he'd hit his younger brother would have popped him. Like they would have gone at it, it was great. But this is a fascinating thing. I thought about it, I was like, that is what we often feel and do. And it's not even a bad thing. But we often are sort of working to tame certain sort of ideologies, or as we've been talking about, scripts of masculinity. So here's what he's saying, right? They aspire to tame because the male archetypes, now this is interesting because, right, specifically to Western culture, were forged in more sexist eras. And that sexism is now regarded as a reason to reject the archetypes of masculinity entirely. So a lot of the archetypes that you found, years and years ago, was birthed in an age where it was incredibly sexist, and we have to like acknowledge that a lot of that was incredibly sexist, right? The archetypes of masculinity entirely in the hopes of building some sort of new progressive man instead. Now, you've heard this, you've seen this, you've heard this talked about. It's a fascinating view, right? And that there's some new form of what a man could and should be, and this is what it looks like, right? And then he swings the other direction. Here's what he says. He says, but in an overreaction to this reaction, which I think is, how culture goes, conservatives, specifically in the Trump era, have ended up defending a cattishness that would make Wickham, now this is where he starts referencing, and some of you will know these, Wickham blush in the mistaken belief that they're defending masculinity itself when they're not. They're defending can we say this together? Defending the vices of masculinity. And this is the Andrew Tate stuff. Sorry. Right? This is the stuff where it goes, masculinity looks like X. Here's what it is. And there's all sorts of ways about this, and there are parts of it, you know this, that are interesting and probably good. And then there are parts of it that are so incredibly bad, and what gets celebrated often isn't what masculinity could and should be. It's actually the vices of what masculinity often sort of, encapsulates and brings to itself. And so then he hits on the other side and he says this, right? He says it this way. He says, but the new progressive man isn't much of a success either. And this is what a lot of times we don't talk about. If you listen to liberal women complaining about the male feminist cads and soft boys in their dating pool, progressive culture seems to have ended up creating a lot of Uriah Heeps, and if you know these references, and Gilbert Osmonds, men pretending to reject the masculine vices, but really sublimating them into softer forms of exploitation. And this is what I think is one of the most fascinating views of what masculinity and manhood looks like right now in our culture. As you have one group or sect over here It is the hyper sort of masculine, and it feels degrading in a lot of ways. There's an anger that's attached to it. There's this thing that's attached to it. And anger's not always bad, and certainly this isn't always bad, but what it often parades as is a celebration of going so far in that direction that it actually exploits people. And then you have a whole other version over here that in a response to that creates a new form of what masculinity could and should be in a progressive version. And this version of masculinity, right, uses the same exploitation in a different packaging in a different way, which actually, and this is what we're gonna talk about, speaks to the problem of our view of what a masculine man actually is. Because in the thread of all of that temptation is something that I believe all men struggle with to some degree. And all of us are prone to, and here's what I think has happened for most people, I think, or most guys in their teens, in their 20s, and 30s, and some in their 40s is this. The view of what masculinity is feels confusing at best, bad at worst, and most men just don't know what to do with it, right? You feel a little bit shamed if you bow up. We feel a little bit shamed when we raise boys that are a little rowdy. We feel a little bit shame when there's a version of this where there's anger involved. There's a little bit of shame, and this is always so fascinating to me, that there ends up being shame sometimes for people that are serving in armed forces. Like there's a little bit of this, and you just go, wait a minute. And there's a sort of a degrading of this sort of side. And then on the same side, it's like you go the other way, and there's a shaming for love and softness. There's a shaming for care. And all of a sudden you have both of these, and what a lot of men just feel is a little bit confused. And so what we've been talking about over the last few weeks, and again, I'd love for you to go back and watch it, not because of YouTube views. My mom gives me plenty of YouTube views anyway by myself. Here's what I tell you though. Going back and watching it, you're gonna see what I believe is the picture of this, and that's with Jesus, right? Jesus embodies the lion and the lamb, which we talked about, those two things. So today, what I'm gonna do for the next few minutes is in response to this quote, right? I'm gonna give you 3. I have 5, but I don't have time to do 5. I have 3 that I'm gonna talk about. And there's 3 things that if I was sitting with you over lunch or coffee and I got to sit with every man, these are 3 things that I would say, you can't prioritize everything, but people who are followers of Jesus, who are creating this redemptive work in the world by submitting to him, these are 3 things that they do exceptionally well and they give their life to. And I'll say this, I'll just be really honest with you. Most of the time I'm trying to craft all these phrases so well. Hopefully they're crafted well enough, but I'd say I'm just gonna say it. And I would love for you to take notes if you're here and you have it, and well, if you're here in your mail. All right, so here's the first one is this. The first one is this, I think there has to be a deep pursuit of holiness in your life. Now you don't hear the word holiness very often in our culture. You don't really hear it that much in the church anymore, right? And I think this is so interesting. There is a version, and I'm never gonna say this perfectly, so forgive me. But there's a version of Christianity that still puts you at the center of Christianity in your own decision-making and in your own wisdom, right? Most of you know this. In like the late 80s, early 90s, there was a massive shift in the church. And the shift was moving away from some form of legalism, because when you moved away from legalism, more people wanted to attend, right? This is the truth. So you stop talking about legalistic sort of things. People were like, well, I didn't like the legalism anyway, so a lot of people flocked to the church. Now, the flip side of this is I'm not a legalist in this, but what a lot of people lost was like a desire to be pure and holy. And the emphasis became wisdom. And here's what's so fascinating about wisdom. You can talk about wisdom in a way where it puts you at the center of what wisdom actually is. And that was never the goal of wisdom teaching. Wisdom teaching would say you are fully and predetermined to submit to God in what he says the way of the world should be. And so what they did is they replaced holiness with wisdom, left you at the center trying to figure out what that was. And in the middle of that, most people defaulted to a version of living that feels wise but isn't always holy. Because holiness is defined pretty clearly in scripture around what it looks like to be holy. It's not like, I wonder what they think. And often that gets paraded as legalism, and sometimes it can be legalism. It's not a person's job to look at you and do this as a judge, right? But what is also true is that when you submit your life to Jesus, not pray a prayer to get out of hell, right? When you submit your life to Jesus, you go, here's the fullness of my life. I am committed, now don't miss this, everybody look for a second, to the way of Jesus in the world. And what a lot of people do, and I struggle with this too, and I've struggled with this at different points in my life, is I've tried to manage my sin rather than kill it. And those are different things, right? I put in my notes, I said this, that holiness is not containment, it's crucifixion, it's not taming what's toxic, it's tearing it out by the root. And here's what I mean by that. And this is like, what I mean by that is this. Some of you treat sin like a whoops, or like, I'll do it again because there's not gonna be immediate consequence. Can I tell you something? And for most of the most devastating things that you could do, there's not an immediate consequence to most of that. It lives and it grows and it breeds inside of you something that kills your soul slowly. And what's interesting is a lot of early preaching around this, not early like in terms of all of time, but 1800, 1700, you listen to these preachers, you hear like sinners in the hands of an angry God, which again, I'm not saying like that's the standard. Like the image of this of like, don't, it's not that. And so there's a version of this, it's like, well, it's not angry this, burn in hell. But there's a version of this that you almost look at your son or your daughters or your kids and you go, when they're young and they're about to do something that's detrimental to them, there's a different tone. There's a different tone, right? When my 3-year-old was running to the street, right? Versus like when he just like, I'm trying to pick one. There's so many that I could just, a quick one. That when he like smacked me in the face jokingly, you know what I mean? Okay, it was pretty similar, but you get it. All right, so, but I'm just saying this, like, there is a stop, this is urgent, don't do that matters, right? And a lot of that got lost in wisdom teaching. And it's not like wisdom teaching is bad, it just leaves it so much up to you, and it's like, well, you should be wise, and if you're not, and there's not immediate consequences. But holiness goes, no, there is no version of this that says contain your sin to a place where it doesn't harm you really bad. It's kill it. Don't leave it around, right? I put another one in here. Again, there's a lot of little questions here. We don't choose to manage destructive appetites, right? Appetites. We put them to death. Like you put it to death. You don't stop doing it, right? You kill it to the best of your ability, right? And then you pray, right? And then you pray, you beg God. This is, again, one of the things that gets so easily lost. And then you beg God to change your heart. And one of the other things that I'll just tell you is this. I think one of the things that easily gets lost is the idea that God still has the power to actually change a person's heart. And that's a whole different thing. That's like going like, no. He doesn't just incrementally slowly make you better. God can change your heart and your desires in an instant. And it happens, right? Now, I'm gonna say one more around this. There's the killing thing, but in the New Testament in particular, there's one area of this that goes against the grain of killing it. And the other area of this has a different sort of mindset altogether. And I'll just tell you what it is, especially for the men in the room. I think this is true of both. But this is in the form of lust and all sexual immorality, right? When it comes to sexual immorality, let me say this out the gate, right? The writings of the New Testament don't talk about this in the same way. So in most all forms of sin that gets talked about in the New Testament, it is kill it, uproot it, be done with it, burn it, then stare at it, burn it again. Like it's some version of that, right? But when it comes to lust, there's one primary passage that we talk about, and it gets taught as if it says it like this. Defeat sexual immorality, because every sin that a man does outside of his body, right? But he who is sexually immoral sins against his own body. Now let me stop here. This is what it feels like when it gets taught. And that's not at all what it says, right? It's not what it says. What it actually says in this particular instance isn't that you kill it, it's that you flee from it. You flee from sexual immorality, which is fascinating. When you look at the New Testament writings around this, and you'll see this. What you find is that when it, again, talks about most sin, it's like, kill it, be done with it, walk away. But if you're being seduced, it doesn't say, kill that urge, walk away from that appetite, you're done. It's almost as if that desire or particular appetite is too strong. What it says is, run the other direction. Flee. So when it comes to holiness, again, this is where, again, I get so fascinated by this. You look at the stats, and there's also, the stats, they vary depending on which one, but all of them are bleak, right? When it comes to lust in particular, right, the average age for a young boy to look at pornography for the first time is 11 years old, right? 73% to 78% of all men in Western culture look at pornography at least once a month, right? Men who identify as Christian men, 73 to 77%, right? So it's not like it's just so much better in the church, right? So I'm just going here's what's so fascinating. When you think about this, you're like, is it that bad? It's probably, there's actually a whole push towards this in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, where we go it is a personal sin that doesn't affect other people. But now you know, and we know because of technology, because of the things that we've learned, what happens behind the scenes and a lot of the stuff that you are watching is actually incredibly exploitive to women, right? And you look at this, you go in every facet of this, all of the data, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, says it's harmful to people. And what we do is we go, it can't be that bad because it's just me and it's in private. Now, I'm gonna say out the gate, this gets taught as if it's a 100% true story. It's not a true story, but the image is so perfect that I'm like, I don't know how else to say it any better. This is a metaphor that gets used, and I think it's such a beautiful metaphor. So I'm gonna show you this. Some of you have heard a version of this. John Eldredge made this popular in the 90s, early 2000s, but it gets passed on from survival literature that comes significantly earlier than this. And it's like a cautionary tale specifically around an Eskimo culture, specifically in the winter. And what the tale would say is some version of what would happen is that wolves would come in, and as they came in, they were killing things that they didn't want them to kill, right? And so the question is, well, how do we kill the wolf, right? And so the image around this is so fascinating. What they said it would happen is that they would take an incredibly sharp knife and they would cover the knife in blood, because wolves would be attracted to that because of their sensitivity to smell. And then they would freeze it. And then they would put more blood on top of it and freeze it. And then they would put more blood on top of that and freeze it. 3 to 5 layers of it sounds gross, but a knife that's like a popsicle of blood. And they would put it in the ground to attract the wolves to come to it. Now here's the image that I think is so powerful and a little bit maddening and also ridiculously true of what this is. So the wolf would come, and they would lick this like a popsicle, and as they licked it, because it was ice, the tongue would become numb, and they would go through layer after layer after layer until they got to the knife part. And when they got to the knife part, this would eventually kill them, right? But they were numb to it by the time they got to the place where the weapon actually caused the most damage. In fact, through every layer of the popsicle, they experienced pleasure until they were numb enough to the place where the thing that brought them pleasure destroyed them. That is pornography. And this is where you go I don't know that that's true. And here's why you don't know that that's true. Because you haven't experienced the fullness of the effects. It's a little bit like ibuprofen. When you are in pain, there's a version of sexual immorality that numbs the pain to a place, but you continue to numb it like any other addiction. And when you do, right, eventually you are just fully and finally numbed to the thing that's bothered you. Again, fascinating stat. This would be an interesting thing for you to read, or maybe not. Just trust me on this. The amount of men today that experience dysfunction when it comes to male sexual activity, under 30, has skyrocketed since the cell phone came into existence. 20-year-old, 25-year-old, 30-year-old men who struggle here because it does something to you emotionally, physiologically, and to the core of who you are, right? Put it in my say this way, that lust ultimately convinces you to satisfy a legitimate desire in an illegitimate way, and when that happens, don't miss this, what you are doing is the image of the wolf in your own heart and your life. But I'm going to say it this way too. So lust ultimately, you can go to the next one, yeah. Lust ultimately numbs your spirit and your capacity to experience the world the way that God intended, right? Now, I want to give an action step around all these things, and I wish I could give you like a perfect example of this. And I can't, but I would say this. What a lot of men do is they feel shame, so they don't talk about it. They don't talk about it to anybody. They feel guilty, then they don't. Then they stop for 3 weeks, and they come back, and some version of that, right? And I'm just saying, when it comes to this one in particular, I'm sure there are other things. But particularly when it comes to sexual immorality, there are very few things that will derail your life as fast and as quickly and as much as sexual immorality in your life, specifically as a man. And so I'll say this, if you've been managing it, it's time to stop. If you've been courting this thing over here, whatever it is, whatever this addiction is, and it's just like, it's around, but I haven't like killed it, kill it or flee. But you gotta do one of those two things, right? Number one. Number two is this, all right? Number two is this, unoffendable heart. Now, I hate this phrase, so I'm just gonna tell you out the gate, I hate it. I almost didn't even use it. Hate this phrase. I don't even think unoffendable is a word. I don't love this phrase. And also, it's the best way to say what we're about to say. Many men that I talk to have a version of a wound that they've kept around or managed in the exact same way that we just talked about everything else. And they've let that offense sit somewhere in their psyche, in their head, in their heart, some way to some degree. And it's caused them to respond in their life in ways that are unhealthy, right? In fact, when you sit around with guys and you talk and it finally get real, right? They finally start talking about things for real. If you trace back the anger, if you trace back the insecurity, if you trace back even the uncertainty, if you trace back a lack of purpose, generally you get to a place where there is a moment of offense that sat there and it still sits there. And it's like something rotten that just exists, right? I was in college, and college boys, especially freshmen, are stupid. And so what we did is, I'm just kidding. What we did is this. I'm just kidding, that was a bad joke. Most people. So there's one where they took something that smelled incredibly bad. We had this elevator in our dorm room, and they popped up the little, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, you get it. The roof thing, and they put it on top of the roof, and they let it sit there for months. And so when you get on the elevator, it's like, good God. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there were literal people, this is a true story, they'd get masks just to get in the elevator. I'm like, you could take the stairs, but that's a different conversation. Anyway, so, they couldn't figure out what it was. And nobody thought to just go. And it just sat there and it rotted and it made everything awful. And I was like, that is actually this, right? Whatever version of the offense that you still hold on to is doing that, and you just don't know it. It is so subtle in most of your lives. Ready? Come on, let me just say, if you are cynical, it's likely because of an offense. You're not born cynical. You're just not. People aren't born cynical. You might be born with a version where you see everything, and that's different, right? Cynicism is the assumption that there's a version of this that's just going to turn out bad. You don't just wake up and become that. There's something that happens, and oftentimes it just exists somewhere back here. I'll say this lovingly. We talk about sarcasm as if it's intelligence. And a lot of times, sarcasm is coming from intelligent people, but in and of itself is not all that intelligent. It's just another form of masked cynicism that causes you to degrade other people. Amen. Let's just call it what it is. Like, now, it's funny. I think it's so funny. It's destructive. And here's how you know it's destructive. Try it on your wife, you know? You know what I'm saying? Like, you're like, oh yeah. And then here's how you know it's destructive, right? Try it on your wife in public. This is how you die. You know, like, this is what it is. Like, this is how it is. Now, here's how you know this. You don't do this with your kids, or you shouldn't, you know? Publicly degrading your kids, even with sarcasm and humor. Some of you, that's what happened to you. Like, you were a kid and your parents were really sarcastic to you. And what you figured out how to do is to laugh through it, except it was real fake. And on the inside, you were dying. And on the outside, you laughed. And then you became older and you figured out how to do it too. And then you got better at it. And then you got better than them at it. And now it's like, no one's gonna hurt me quite like that. That's what offense does. Like, it grows and then it shapes you, right? Put in my notes, I said it this way. This is a quote from a guy named John Bevere. This one in particular is a fantastic book. It's called The Bait of Satan. I'm sure I'm just straight ripping parts of this from John Bevere. So thank you, John. It's called The Bait of Satan, but he says this: offense is the bait of the enemy. It will destroy your relationships and it will destroy your destiny. And it likely won't destroy the relationship that you're responding to, because usually that's already dead. It'll destroy the other ones, right? So I might say it this way, that offense is a trap that looks like justice, but it ends in bondage for you. That's what offense is. That's what offense is. It looks like justice, but it's just bondage for your heart, right? Now this passage in Proverbs, one verse that just like right to it, Here's what it says. This is the New King James Version, so I can use the New King James. So here it is. A brother offended is harder to win than a strong city, and contentious are like the bars of a castle. This is what I think is so fascinating. It's the hardening of the bondage that is so true. When you let offense take root, what offense is doing is it is building your own prison cell in your heart. Now, put in my notes, again, I said this way, offense is inevitable. It is not wrong to be offended. You're gonna be offended. That guy cuts you off, yeah, I'm offended. And then you do sign language in the middle of it. It's so fascinating. Like, you got Nouveau Church on the back of your car, and this is just me, this isn't you. You're gonna be offended, right? Right? But living offended is a choice. And it is, you have created a relationship with the offense that you have decided to keep around. And in the same way that you keep unhealthy relationships in your life, right? You have to decide that you are going to let that go like you wouldn't let an unhealthy person go, right? Now, I want to say like the pious version of this is because even though they don't deserve forgiveness, I gave it to them, look how good of a person I am. I'm not that good of a person. I don't care that much about that person in that way. What I care more about is not living in bondage. So if you're wired like me, a little bit selfish, you don't forgive just for the other person, you forgive for you, right? I put it in here, I say it this way, eventually, right, your offense becomes, now let me say this, it becomes your filter that builds emotional walls and spiritual prisons around your heart, right? And I say this, but it's the filter that I want you to get. Every offense changes your outlook on the next interaction and relationship. If you're married, right, come on, let's talk about, if you're married, there will be micro offenses throughout your entire marriage. I hear marriages, and you see it, you've been around people too, you'll hear marriages where they just sort of like, you know what I'm talking about? Like it's just a constant sort of that. And I always look out and I just go, that's micro offenses that are just bubbling up over fighting about stupid stuff that doesn't matter. Somewhere along the way, and I just say like one of the best things that you can do in your marriage is just predetermine, I'm gonna forgive you constantly for the things that you know about and maybe even the things that you don't. I'll say one more, but specifically for the guys on this one, can I say something honestly? I've dealt with this a lot over the last 10 years, a lot, and this is hard. Let me say this. Some of you are appropriately vulnerable. You have enough acquaintances and you are deep enough with enough people for it to appear like you have real friends. And then you peel back the layer and you don't. And the reason that you don't is because somewhere along the way, someone betrayed you or caused pain that you don't know how to carry fully. Come on. And what you decided to do, and you don't even say it, there's not like a stake in the ground, you just drift into it, is you go, I actually don't need them. I'm fine. And you know what? You probably are. Until it's like 2 a.m. and you actually need somebody, and not one of the acquaintances that you know you would call. Now, not that they wouldn't answer, right? That's a different thing. Not that they wouldn't pick up or that there aren't people in your life that would answer the phone call. That's a different thing. But that you would want to call. But the moment that you actually need it, right? Who is the person you want to call that knows you well enough to hear you say, I need help, and will answer the phone then. You don't miss it, right? And if you don't have that in the moment that you need it, none of the other ones matter in that moment, right? And if that's been built up because you've allowed these walls to protect you, there is one answer to it, and it's the least sexy answer, and it's the least, it feels the least practical, and it's the most true, and that's this. It's forgiveness. And what forgiveness does, you know this, it frees your present, right? And it frees your future self. I've given hundreds of talks with some form of forgiveness over the years. Can I just tell you something? There's no better way to say it. There is no 9-step version of it. You just have to let it go. You just have to let it go. There's not like, and here's that. No. You have to say, you owe me this. You don't owe me anymore. And you let it go. All right, last one is this, right? This is the one I'll get emails about, so it'll be fun. Discover and cultivate your purpose, right? Discover and cultivate your purpose. Put in my notes, say this way. A man without purpose is a danger to himself and a disappointment to those who depend on him. All right? Let me read it again. A man without purpose is a danger to himself and a disappointment to those who depend on him. Now, let me say what this means. A lot of people go, well, this is a job. It can't be a job. It doesn't have to be a job. It's a career. It can't be a career. It doesn't have to be a career. It doesn't have to be the same. Like stay at home. It can be stay at home. It doesn't have to be stay at home. It could be those things. I think the more like intense version of this is like, if there's not fire in your bones for something, you are a danger to yourself and a silent disappointment to the people who are looking to you. I talked about this a few weeks ago. And I'd say, I really do deeply and desperately believe that God's design for you is to have a yearning in your heart for something to be different in the world and to give your life to it. Now, maybe it's a job, maybe it's not. Maybe it's this, maybe it's not. But like it is a fire in your bones and it's different. And you get around men, this is the honest part, because I've had seasons where I've had highs of this and lows of this. When you get around men in particular who have that, and you don't have that, you don't want to be around those men. You don't. And this is the really blunt, honest thing. So what a lot of men will do, and you'll see it, they'll surround themselves with men who don't have that to feel safe and secure in a group of people who don't have it. And I'd say, I get on Twitter. So like, I love entrepreneurial stuff. I love business stuff. I mean, I geek out on all that. I'm not in the camp of like, so surround yourself with, all the, only, like, I don't think it's just that. I think you should have that. I don't think that's only what it is. I think what it is though, is if you're only in a circle of people who don't have fire in their bones or purpose, you need to go find somebody and you're gonna feel wildly insecure and just walk over and be a part of that circle and feel insecure for a while. Because that fire, this is weird, it absolutely is contagious. And I think one of the greatest dangers to men is living your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, raising kids and being tired and struggling and making it happen enough to where you feel safe enough not to have fire, courage, and I think empowerment of the Holy Spirit to change the world. And I'll just tell you, you have to fight that. There in the New Testament, Paul's writing to a church in Ephesus. And it's a verse that doesn't feel like it has teeth. And you look at it, it's like, man, it has so much teeth to it. But he says, for we are God's, I don't want you to miss this. We are God's handiwork, right? Then you go to the next one. Yep. We are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works. And this is the part that I think bothers me in the best way, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Now, don't miss this. Please don't miss this. Because I think God has a plan for your life. I used to stand up to middle school students. There's always middle school students. I did that for like 8, 10 years, something like that. And I was like, if I can catch them early, and say, God has a plan for your life. You don't want to miss it. We do these whole retreats. We spend all this money. We do hundreds, some of these even thousands of students together. And the whole thing of it, I'll just say the whole reason we did it was that I could stand on stage and go, God has a plan for your life, and you don't want to miss it. You know why? Because sometimes we allow our fear of pain, our past offense, our current rejection of holiness and courting things that we shouldn't court to diminish and kill the work of God in us, to make us safe and tired and silent and bored. And that's not God's best for your life. I put in my notes, I said it this way: men without vision don't necessarily choose evil, they just settle for ease. And that slow setting is how legacies die. I believe that so much. I used to not. And then the second statement is what actually got me to believe it. That says, your son in particular will build their lives in response to you, inspired by or as a reaction to the model you gave. And if that doesn't haunt you, yeah, man, that feels like guilt. Sure, call it whatever you want. I don't care. Yeah, I don't think it's guilt. I think it's just true. Can I tell you? Like me and you, I've absolutely built my life in some ways in response to lack in those areas. Some of you had a dad in the home and nobody knows that it was a tough relationship. And you said this in your heart somewhere: I will never, ... That's a reaction to. Some of you had such phenomenal fathers. They were truly amazing, imperfect, but truly amazing men. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you go, I aspire to be a different kind of man, but to be a great man like him. And I'm just gonna tell you, and then there's a whole group, and this is true of most of us. Most of us have complex relationships with our dads. Most of us do. And there's kind of a little bit of both. I'm just gonna tell you, like, you know this. You actually get to decide that story. You get to decide that story. You decide that story every day. And what I wish I could do, and I know that, I wish I could just shake every dad in particular and go, if 80-year-old version of you could come to, I'm 37-year-old version of me and say, I know you are tired. I know you're a little low-key pissed today. I know that you didn't eat lunch, which is why you're a little bit low-key pissed. Like, I know that you're insecure. I know you're tired. But show up, and don't show up at a B-, but show up at an A+ for this hour. 80-year-old version of me would still beat up 37-year-old version of me and go, get with it. You're like, that's pain, or I'm tired. Yeah, it is pain. It's hard, yeah? The version of you that at 80 years old looks back at your life and could magically show up and look at you and go, hey, I don't know if I can take that step. They look at you, like shake you and go, take the step. Take the step. The version, 80-year-old version of you showing up in the moments where you court pleasure that you shouldn't court, where you lie about things that you shouldn't lie about, where you're dishonest in parts of your life, where you allow yourself to find yourself tethered to addictions, whether tethered to the cross and what he calls you to there. But they come and shake you and go, there's no pretty version of it. It's stop and be who you were meant to be. And I'll tell you, there's a movie called About Time. Y'all ever seen the movie About Time? It's one of my favorite movies. And then also like Braveheart, just to be clear about both. But anyway, so About Time is great. At the end of the movie, there's a Ben Folds songs that come on at the end of the movie. And he has this capacity to go back in time and change things and do this. And then at the end of the movie, it's one of the greatest lines. He goes like, I live my life now each day, right? With this like assumption that I'm not gonna miss it. I'm gonna be fully present here, that I don't have to go back. I wouldn't go back and change it if I could. And I was gonna tell you, you want fire in your bones around you being a dad? Remember the fact that every one of your kids are gonna tell a story about you in private, not to your face, but in private, about the kind of man that you are. Every single one of your kids are gonna tell a story about you. Your wife one day will tell a story about you, right? And she'll be kind, but you'll hear it in her voice whether or not you showed up for her dreams too, right? She'll tell a story. And I'm just telling you, if you are at all playing with a version of this that compromises that, it's not like, well, I'll get this done. Usually I'm like, pick a calendar day, screw that. Today is the calendar day. Stop. Today is the day you go, I'm done. Today is the day that you got to put that aside. Today is the day I pursue holiness. I'm not going to let offenses do this thing to me. And at the end of the day, what I'm going to do with my life is move in the purpose that God has called me to move in. And if you don't know, then you're going to go, I'm going to commit the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, whatever it takes to find the fire in my bones and run. And I'm just going to tell you, when you do that kind of thing, I'm just going to tell you, that will deeply change who you are for the rest of your life. The last thing I'm gonna say, then I'm gonna pray. One of the most valuable character lessons that you're gonna give is a portrait of your holy struggle to be who you were made to be and what you were created to do. You kids should know what it's like to hear you from another room because you're desperate for God, because you need him so much to be all of the things that we're talking about. Your wife should know what it's like for you to contend with God on her behalf. To know her so well that you are praying both with her and behind her back about what God might do in her life. That you are begging God to give you this divine understanding of your responsibilities as a human male. God, help me to know and respond and to see and to run into the end of my life a little bit bloodied up, a little bit more tired than everybody else, more stories of things that might have been difficult, but pursuing fully self-sacrifice, open-handedness. God, what do you want me to do? And being obedient to who he's called you to be. Let me pray for us. Father, I pray specifically for every guy in the room. The vast majority of us, including me, have one or two of these that are present right now in our hearts and our life. And many of us have tried to do a lot of this on our own, and it's made us more tired, less fire, and it's caused us to numb pain in ways that we shouldn't. Pray for the person in the room who feels addiction to something or to some degree. I pray that they get all of the help that they need from therapists, from doctors, all the ways they need the practical help. But God, I pray that then they would fall at their knees before you and repent. Not say I'm sorry, not that. But put a stake in the ground and say, I'm choosing to follow you. And we do believe that you can change the heart in an instant. And I pray that you would do that. I pray if it's not adjusted to the point, or if they continue to feel tempted, God, I pray that they would remain faithful to you. That they would have other people in their life that can come alongside of them. They can be honest with them about. Pray for the person who's offended. And they know that they're offended. And as soon as I said it, they sort of checked out. And they justify it because they're probably right. And the other person was probably wrong. And I pray that you would help them to let it go. That every one of those shackles that's connected to their heart would fall. And in light of their own sin and the grace that you've given them, I pray in an overwhelming moment, even right now, that it feels like those things fall off of them and that they're free. You got to pray for the man in the room who's felt purpose before, but it feels like life sort of knocked it out of them, and what they feel more than that is some version of apathy. And maybe it's laziness, maybe it's not. Maybe it's restlessness that just sits off to the side. Maybe somewhere along the way they adopted a script about who they were that just isn't true. I pray that you create such a fire in them that feels like it doesn't release them and it just fuels them to move forward and do something. Pray that every single step they take feels celebrated. I pray that the women in their lives would just continue to pour fuel on that. And I pray that in this room today, anybody that watches this online later, God, I pray that what happens is that fire gets lit and it is empowered by the Spirit to do something extraordinary. And that a year from now, the stories that come out of this day would be of men who felt that kind of passion. And I pray that you would forgive us for striving in our own strength. You'd forgive us in allowing ourselves to be baited into things we shouldn't be baited. And God, that you would allow us to become who you've called us to be. In Jesus' name we pray.